In the latter days of Amathia's garden, time to check out the sump.
What we're gonna do right here is go back, way back into time.
Hey everybody, Reefgrrl here, and welcome to my channel. My reefing life over the next year is going to be crazy. So if you haven't already, I would love it if you'd subscribe, and while you're over there, hit that notification bell so you can stay right up to date with all of the stuff that is happening. To start with, let me say, this sump has gone through so many changes over the past 3 years, I've hardly been able to keep track. One thing that hasn't changed though is my use of a Jabo DCS 7000 as my return pump. It has been flawless. What's not so flawless is this messy wall over here. I used to try and keep it clean, but my Bubblemegas Curve A5 skimmer would not stop overflowing and sprayed foam on a constant basis. And back then I had a fan in here to help control humidity. That fan was perfectly positioned to spray that foam everywhere. More recently, I use an air stone in the skimmer chamber of the sump to help elevate pH, and I'm pretty sure that also contributes to some of this mess. Something I keep very clean is my Fluval E300 heater. I think keeping it clean has contributed to how well it's worked for the 3 years that I've used it. It's actually my backup heater. It's plugged into the battery backup so that in a power failure, it is operating and I can check the temperature. The return pump is also plugged into the battery backup, and between the two of those things, I maintain both flow and temperature during short power outages. A couple of crashes taught me the value of keeping my sump inside as clean as possible. So one thing I did was install this little Ovation 210 mini submersible filter. It has an output that I aim at the bottom to keep detritus suspended. And because it's a filter, it draws in a lot of that detritus into the filter floss I have tucked into the bottom. It works perfectly as a churn in my return section, and all I need to do is remember to swap out that little bit of filter floss. And then we have the sponge. Between these two baffles is a sponge that came with the tank. This thing is full of life. I've never in 3 years removed it from here. I'm sure people do take them out and clean them, but I don't have the nerve to do it because I'm afraid I will crash my tank. On top of it, I always place a filter pad. This really does reduce the amount of crud that makes it into the return chamber. Eventually it gets clogged up and starts overflowing, so I just replace it. Looking at this rack of Seachem matrix pebbles, I'm so glad I did this because when I set up my sump initially, I thought it was fine to just throw that stuff all over the bottom and just let it do its thing. Yeah, not so much. It became a disgusting mess and essentially a nitrate factory. In my sump reboot video, I described the process of how I went about putting this together, and there's a little more detail about why. When you see that video, you'll see why something needed to be done. This has worked perfectly to keep things clean, and I would do this again in a heartbeat. Speaking of nutrient control, check out my giant dense mat of dark green Chaetomorpha algae. I love this stuff. It grows like crazy. It helps control the nutrients, and I don't think I would operate a sump without it. In fact, as I record this, there's a piece of this stuff in the holding tank in a small molly breeder box under the lights so that I can nurture it through until I have another tank up and running where it can grow again. Another piece of equipment I use to keep my sump clean is this Tunza 6020. It's mounted upside down so that it pushes detritus across the bottom towards the skimmer. I have a white pad wrapped around it because without that, the pump gets clogged up rather quickly with Chaetomorpha algae. This helps keep it running a very long time before it needs cleaning. It works great. Here are a couple of baskets of Miracle Mud. I've had them in here since almost the beginning, and I do believe it has a beneficial effect. This whole area is teeming with life. There's the Pod Hotel, and I think today there was a hatch of some sort. About a year ago, I started using Elimifos, and this bag has Elimifos long life granules. This stuff does an amazing job controlling phosphates. I have it hanging on a magnetic feeding clip because I couldn't think of another way to keep it upright right near where the flow comes down from the filter cups. One thing I've never really been happy about is the setup of my dosing hoses. This is kind of a mess. It's never been ideal, and I'm always messing around with it, trying to keep the ends of the hoses clear and keep them separate from each other. This is one thing I will definitely change next time I set up a sump. Jammed in down here, I have some Aquachar. I truly believe this stuff got my pH stabilized at 8.2 and above, and most recently it's hitting 8.3 plus. I think this stuff works. I'm not a fan of filter socks, and I tried several different designs of filter cups. These are the Red Sea version. This design works because of those slots at the bottom. Most of the other ones I tried only had holes drilled through the very bottom of the cup, and that type would get clogged up very, very quickly. These, however, go a lot longer before water starts overflowing the top. I really think this design is perfect. And here's how I set up the cups. In the bottom is a cut-to-fit filter pad. On top of that, some filter floss, and in the very top is a rolled up piece of pinky filter. This combination gets the most detritus out of the water of anything I've ever used. Red Sea supplies this RODI container to hold water for topping off, but it's too small and it's awkward, so I started using it to hold equipment. I have my skimmer controller in there. You can see this hose coiled up. That leads to a drain and gets attached to a pump when I do water changes. And I have a couple of Tom aqua lifters in there. One is for bubble scrubbing and the other is to manage the ATO. Although it's a bit crowded in here, this was the perfect place to house all of this stuff high and dry and conveniently accessible. And another great use for the ATO reservoir is to clamp on my light that I use to light up the sump and to grow my Chaetomorpha. This is a par 30 bulb that I got on eBay from a vendor called Coral Compulsion. I can highly recommend this bulb. It has done wonders to grow this Chaeto. The skimmer is close by, and this piece of black egg crate blocks light from this bulb from reaching the body and growing algae. Works great. So let's look at something that worked and then didn't work. This is a Cobalt EX. It's plugged into the drawer over here, right there, on a switched outlet. I used to use it for water changes from the sump. The hose you saw coiled up earlier would be attached to the output of this pump, and it's hanging here by the input. There it is right there, but it crapped out on me. And because of the way the wires are routed, I am unable to remove it from here to take it out and clean it. So it just hangs there, and I use a maxi jet instead. I'm sure I can get it running again once I can get it out of there and clean it, but this taught me that it's really important to make sure that you route your wires in such a way that the equipment is accessible for maintenance. I know, so obvious! Another great example of equipment that can't be removed for maintenance is my Finex titanium heater. 300 watts. Here's the little thermostat controller. I can't get it out of there because the controller won't fit through those pipes. The heater won't fit through those pipes. So when I want to clean it, I have to pull it forward out of the sump at the front and clean it on the spot. Yeah, that was not a good decision. Won't be doing that again. On the other hand, a great decision was to get this Deltec 600i skimmer. This thing has never let me down. It replaces a Bubble Magus Curve A5, about which I will not go on at length complaining. Let's just say I hated that thing in the end, and I have zero regrets getting this particular skimmer. It was expensive, but worth every penny. Something else that works extremely well is this UV sterilizer, the Vecton. I have a video about this called Got UV? I Do. Let me tell you a little about it. From this I learned that I will never again run an aquarium without a UV sterilizer. I'm convinced it has contributed to the health of all of the livestock in my aquarium and also made the water beautifully clear. Another thing that worked but didn't work was the ATO setup. This strange looking tube you see here delivers the water from that black tubing that goes across the ceiling of the cabinet for the ATO top up. Earlier I showed you the location of the Tom aqualifter in the ATO reservoir. The location of that is higher than the place the water was being delivered into the sump, and lower than the place the water was being drawn from in the ATO container that's in the cabinet beside the tank cabinet. So yeah, it became a siphon. So the black water line travels across the ceiling of the cabinet and ends approximately 4 inches below that. It's inside the black section of this acrylic tube. This guides the water all the way down to the surface of the return chamber and makes sure the delivery of the water is reliable without any mess. I wouldn't do this again, obviously. I think were I to change it, I would locate the aqualifter much closer to where the water was being delivered into the sump. We had to make it work. It worked, but it's not a great solution. Setting up and running this tank was a massive learning experience, and a lot of that learning was done in the sump. What I'm showing in this video is the end result of that learning. It shows what I ended up doing that worked. This has been running successfully for over a year now. Recent additions were aquachar and these bubbles in the sump. Other than that, the way the equipment is set up is how it's been going for quite a while. The next sump will be set up a lot differently because it'll be a lot bigger, but a lot of the lessons I learned here will definitely be applied. None of this exists anymore. It's all been taken apart, but it's been a great opportunity for me to go back and remind myself of what went well and what didn't. I hope you enjoyed this little journey. Thanks so much for watching. As always, I really do appreciate it.